On the last day of August, 1422, Henry V, the victor of the Battle of Agincourt, finally died from the dysentery that had been plaguing him for months. The warrior king was just 35 and was stood on the brink of becoming King of France. The Treaty of Troyes of 1420 had made Henry the legal heir to the King of France, Charles VI. Henry still had to douse the flames of French discontent at this new arrangement, but he was a man well and truly capable of doing exactly that. The treaty had also married Henry to Charles's daughter Catherine. On one cold winter's night in December 1421, Catherine would give birth to Henry's one and only child. This child was a boy who would be named after his father. This little Henry was born at Windsor and would be quite as unlike his father as it could possibly be imagined. The premature death of Henry V, a death that was typical of a warrior used to fighting battles and besieging towns, cities, and castles, meant two things. Firstly, his baby son, just 9 months old, was now King of England as King Henry VI, and secondly, England's hopes of a full conquest of France were scattered to the wind, although it will be decades yet before the reality of the situation was accepted. Henry VI would live to be not quite 50. He would spend just over 38 years of his life as king, with another decade spent in the political wilderness, a direct result of the civil war that had been sparked by England's capitulation in the French wars, and Henry's own fragility as monarch, as he became increasingly dominated by people around him. As a man, he was gentle, harmless, and almost like a monk in his persona. As a king, he was quite unfit to rule. On the death of Henry V, England was presented with an uncertain future. Having a baby as king meant a long minority government where grown men would have to govern not only England but also protect English interests in France until Henry VI reached an age where he could realistically be expected to make decisions for himself. At the very least, that was still 15 or 16 years away, plenty of time for divisions and rivalries to emerge. Among those most prominent during the king's regency were his uncles, John, Duke of Bedford, who would oversee matters in France, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, who was made Protector of England. Whilst Humphrey would prove to be quite disruptive, John, Duke of Bedford, would try his best to maintain stability for the English crown in France, and he defeated a French army who were assisted by their age-old ally, the Scots, at the Battle of Verneuil in 1424. The success was no mean feat, as the English were outnumbered heavily, and it was said that, among the Scots, many of the high-ranking nobles drowned like dogs. Over the course of the next few years, however, things would turn for the worse, as the French, emboldened by the demise of their great oppressor, Henry V, began to find their feet again in the conflict that had been started so many decades before by Edward III. In 1429, a peasant girl claimed that she had been told by God that she was to help drive the English out of France forever. This girl was, of course, Joan of Arc. The French king, Charles VII, not yet crowned, saw an opportunity to use Joan to his advantage, and with her help, Charles and the French turned the war decisively and permanently in their favour. At the start of the reign of Henry VI, the atmosphere in England was tense. A man named John Mortimer attempted to flee captivity from the Tower of London, hoping to plot against the infant king. Mortimer aimed to put another Mortimer, Edmund, on the throne in Henry's place. John's relationship to Edmund is unsure. Edmund, with a potential claim to the crown, had been at the centre of plots in the past, during the reign of Henry V, but he himself maintained loyalty to the crown. But this didn't put John off. He managed to break out of the tower, but was recaptured and executed at Tyburn. However, the episode showed how fragile things were. In 1425, the fragility of Henry's government became ever more exposed as enmity grew between Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, who had strong support in London, and his half uncle, Henry Beaufort, Bishop of Winchester. The dispute between Humphrey and Henry became so serious that the men of London armed themselves and marched out to accost Beaufort with the evident intention of doing him harm. There was something of a standoff between the two factions, but John, Duke of Bedford, chose that moment to cross the Channel from France, and after his arrival in London, an awkward peace prevailed. In January 1427, King Henry, just turned 5, oversaw Parliament in a fashion. Beaufort, just prior to this, had been made a cardinal. At the Parliament, he was reconciled with Gloucester in a bid to put an end to the long-running feud. Beaufort would then participate in a crusade against heretics in Bohemia. In 1428, Thomas Montague led a campaign in France, and not without some success, in a bid to re-establish English authority and, in theory, prepare the way for Henry VI to be crowned King of France. Montague laid siege to the town of Orleans, a siege which, to Montague's irritation, gradually became a protracted affair. Preparing another assault on the town walls, the unsuspecting Montague was shot dead by an assassin. It would be at the siege of Orleans where the legend of Joan of Arc was born. On the 6th of November 1429, Henry VI was crowned at Westminster Abbey by Henry Churchill, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in a grand ceremony. Henry would be crowned again in December 1431, this time as King of France, but this, as time would tell, would prove futile. A few months prior to Henry's French coronation, Joan of Arc, after she had been captured and sold to the English by the men of Burgundy, had been burned at the stake at the age of about 19. Whatever the truth was regarding the voices that Joan supposedly heard, her story is one of the most astonishing and famous of the medieval period. Addressing King Henry himself, still only a child, but in reality berating the men around him, Joan had written a letter to the English stating, "Return the keys of all the good cities which you have seized to the maid. She is sent by God to reclaim the royal blood, and is fully prepared to make peace, if you will give her satisfaction, that is, you must render justice, and pay back all that you have taken. King of England, if you do not do these things, I am the commander of the military, and in whatever place I shall find your men in France, I will make them flee the country, whether they wish to or not. And if they will not obey, the maid will have them all killed." Joan's brashness and bravery in the face of English occupation had been absolutely astonishing. By the time of Henry's coronation at Saint Denis in 1431, Joan had been dead for nearly 7 months. Henry's French coronation meant, in the eyes of the English, that he was now King of France, but Joan had ensured that in reality this was not the case. These had been bewildering days for the young Henry VI, and things would only get tougher in the years and decades to come. In my next video on Henry VI, we look at his total defeat in the 100 Years' War and his collapse into madness in 1453.